What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved comedic actors abruptly walks off a live television interview? That's exactly what unfolded when Jack Black sat down with Savannah Guthrie on The Today Show, turning what was supposed to be a cheerful promotional appearance into one of the most uncomfortable moments daytime television has seen in years. The studio audience fell into stunned silence as producers scrambled behind the scenes, desperately preparing to cut to commercial. This wasn't a publicity stunt. It wasn't planned. It was a real moment that spiraled out of control in ways no one expected. The interview began exactly as viewers would have hoped. Jack Black entered the set brimming with his trademark energy, waving to the crowd, flashing that unmistakable grin and immediately lighting up the room. Savannah greeted him warmly. The two exchanged pleasantries, and Jack settled onto the couch as cameras rolled and everything appeared perfectly on track. Savannah opened with a safe, friendly question about Jack's latest project and his creative process. Jack leaned in enthusiastically, talking about comedy, authenticity, and staying true to oneself as a performer. He was animated, charming, and effortlessly funny that Jack Black fans know and love. But then the tone shifted. Savannah pivoted the conversation toward comments Jack had previously made about the entertainment industry and cancel culture. On paper, it didn't sound explosive, but the framing of the question instantly altered the atmosphere in the studio. Jack paused, his smile fading just slightly as he carefully chose his words. He spoke about accountability, but also about forgiveness and second chances, emphasizing that people are complex and that growth should be encouraged rather than permanently punished. It was thoughtful, measured, and calm. Savannah nodded, then pressed further. She cited specific public figures who had faced backlash and asked Jack directly whether he believed they deserved forgiveness. The question boxed him in. Any answer risked backlash. Jack shifted in his seat, took a breath, and explained that he didn't believe it was his place to judge individual cases without knowing all the facts. He warned against broad moral judgments and said that this kind of absolutism is part of what's broken in public discourse today. By now, the audience was silent. The lighthearted interview had vanished. Savannah didn't let up. She brought up Jack's past collaborations with people who later became controversial and asked whether he regretted working with them or felt a responsibility to address their actions publicly. Jack's jaw tightened, looking directly at her. He said he had always tried to work with good people and couldn't be held responsible for choices others made years later. Holding someone accountable for the actions of others, he said, was a dangerous precedent. His voice remained steady, but the edge was unmistakable. Still, Savannah continued. She referenced criticism from social media, asking whether Jack felt obligated, given his platform, to take stronger public stances. This time, Jack leaned forward. He said he absolutely believes in using his platform for good, but refused to be bullied into making statements just to satisfy an online mob. Thoughtful conversations, he said, matter more than performative outrage. He would not apologize for thinking carefully before speaking on complex issues. The tension in the room was now undeniable. Savannah offered a tight professional smile and thanked Jack for his honesty before attempting to steer the interview back to safer territory. She asked about his children and how he balances fatherhood with his career. Jack visibly relaxed and began speaking warmly about his kids and the importance of protecting his family life. But then Savannah interrupted, bringing up a social media post made by one of Jack's children that had gained attention online. She asked whether he'd seen it and how he felt about his children, expressing opinions publicly. That's when everything stopped. Jack froze mid-sentence and stared at Savannah in disbelief. He asked why his children were being brought into the conversation at all. He reminded her that they are minors and said dragging them into a national television interview was completely out of line. Savannah defended herself, saying the post was public and relevant to discussions about public figures and their families. She insisted she was simply asking from the perspective of a parent. Jack wasn't having it. He said there's a massive difference between something being public and something being appropriate. To discuss on live television, his children, he said, did not sign up for this. Using them as a talking point was exploitative and crossed a line. In the control room, producers were panicking. This was live TV, and the interview had officially gone off the rails. Savannah tried to pull the interview back from the edge. She apologized, saying she hadn't meant to upset him, but Jack cut her off before she could finish. He told her the issue wasn't just one question, it was the entire interview. From the very beginning, he said, it felt designed to corner him, to manufacture discomfort and conflict where none needed to exist. He accused her of ambush journalism, of pretending to have a friendly conversation while quietly setting traps meant to provoke controversy. Savannah pushed back immediately. Asking difficult questions, she said, was part of her job. Public figures, she argued, should expect to be challenged. And if Jack couldn't handle tough questions, maybe he should reconsider doing interviews altogether. That was the moment everything shifted. Jack stood up. He calmly unclipped his microphone and placed it on the couch between them. Looking directly at Savannah, he said he had done hundreds of interviews over the course of his career and knew the difference between tough questions and outright disrespect. She had crossed a line, he said, and he was done. Savannah looked stunned. She tried to slow things down, suggesting they take a breath and continue, but Jack was already walking away. The cameras followed him as he left the set. The audience frozen in complete silence. Savannah called after him, asking him to please come back and finish the conversation. There was desperation in her voice now, the polished composure beginning to crack. Jack stopped walking but didn't turn around right away. He stood there, back to the camera, shoulders rising and falling as he took a deep breath. Then he turned around and walked back toward the couch. For a brief moment, it looked like he might actually sit down again. The audience collectively exhaled, but Jack didn't sit. He stood in front of Savannah and said he wanted to make something very clear. He had come on the show to promote his work and have a conversation, not to be interrogated about his personal life and his family. Journalists, he said, have a responsibility to treat their guests with basic respect, and that responsibility had been ignored. Savannah replied that respect goes both ways. She insisted her questions were legitimate and accused Jack of overreacting. He had agreed to do the interview, she said, and he knew exactly what kind of show today was. Jack shook his head. There is a difference, he said, between asking challenging questions and weaponizing someone's family for the sake of drama. Bringing up his children's social media posts wasn't journalism, it was tabloid garbage dressed up as serious conversation. The audience was completely silent now. Some looked visibly uncomfortable. Others were transfixed. This was not what anyone expected when they walked into a taping of a morning show. Savannah's co-host, who had remained quiet until now, tried to step in. Maybe everyone should take a step back, he suggested. Maybe they could move on to another topic. Jack turned to him and said moving on was exactly the problem. This kind of interviewing, he said, had become normalized, then someone needed to call it out. Savannah leaned forward, visibly frustrated. She said Jack was being unfair and that she hadn't done anything wrong. Asking about public posts made by his family, she argued, was not out of bounds. He was being overly sensitive. Jack laughed, but there was no humor in it. If the roles were reversed, he said if someone had brought up Savannah's children on live television, she would have lost her mind. The media, he added, operates under a double standard, believing it can ask anything it wants without consequence. Savannah's expression hardened. She said she could handle tough questions and had been asked about her own family before. It comes with the territory, she said, of being in the public eye. Jack asked whether those interviews had been ambushes or whether she had been given a heads up. "There's a difference," he said, "between consenting to a topic and being blindsided on live television." Savannah didn't answer directly. Instead, she pointed out that Jack had a full team of publicists and managers who had discussed interview parameters with producers ahead of time. He should have known what to expect. Jack fired back instantly. His team, he said, had been told this would be a standard promotional interview focused on his work, not his private life, and certainly not his children. If producers had been honest, he said, this conversation never would have happened. Producer's voice could be heard faintly off camera, but the audio was unclear. Savannah glanced toward the control room, then back at Jack. "Sometimes interviews evolve organically," she said. She had simply followed the flow of the conversation. Jack said there was nothing organic about what had happened. She had come in with an agenda, specific points she intended to hit regardless of how the conversation unfolded. It was calculated. Manipulative? Savannah's voice rose slightly. She accused Jack of being dramatic, of making a scene over nothing. "Celebrities face scrutiny all the time," she said. "He needed thicker skin." Jack pointed at her and said, dismissing legitimate concerns as dramatic was a classic deflection tactic one designed to make him look unreasonable. Instead of acknowledging that a line had been crossed, the co-host tried once more to calm things down, suggesting a commercial break. Jack said there was nothing to regroup about. He wasn't going to sit there and pretend everything was fine just to help the show save face. Savannah stood up now. She said Jack was being disrespectful to her, to the show, and to the audience. Walking off mid-interview, she said, was unprofessional. Childish. Jack took a step closer. Jack stepped closer, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made it unmistakably clear he wasn't backing down. What was truly unprofessional, he said, was using his family as bait for ratings. Savannah had made a choice to prioritize controversy over integrity, and he was making a choice not to participate in it. When Savannah warned him that millions were watching and that this moment would explode across social media within minutes, Jack didn't flinch. He said he would rather be seen as someone who stood up for his values than someone who smiled politely while being disrespected. Public perception, he added, would sort itself out. His self-respect was non-negotiable. The room fractured. Murmurs rippled through the audience, some clearly siding with Jack, others convinced he was overreacting. The energy was chaotic, unsettled. Savannah crossed her arms and said she had interviewed hundreds of celebrities, and that Jack was the first to ever walk off her set. Maybe, she suggested, he should think about why that was. Jack answered calmly that just because something had never happened before didn't mean it wasn't long overdue. Maybe others had felt the same way, he said, but were too afraid of backlash to say it out loud. When Savannah asked what he believed she had done that was so wrong, Jack didn't hesitate. He said she knew exactly what she'd done. She had taken personal information about his family and weaponized it for drama. She had framed questions so that no answer could come out clean. What should have been a straightforward interview had been turned into an interrogation. Savannah snapped back that asking questions was her job, and that if Jack couldn't handle basic inquiries about his life, maybe he shouldn't do interviews at all. Jack drew the line clearly. The public does not have a right to everything, especially when it involves his children. The co-host made one last attempt to salvage the moment, suggesting a calmer conversation about media and privacy. Jack declined. There was no common ground left. Savannah had made her choices. He had made his. Turning to the audience, Jack apologized for the discomfort, but said he hoped they understood why he couldn't continue. Then he looked back at Savannah one final time and asked her to think about the impact her questions have. Behind every celebrity, he said, is a real person with a real family and, Those lives shouldn't be treated as disposable content. Savannah didn't respond. She sat there, expression unreadable, as silence stretched across the studio. Cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the awkward aftermath. As Jack began to walk away again, Savannah spoke up, insisting she wasn't the villain, that she had simply done her job. Jack stopped and turned back once more. Casting herself as the victim, he said, was a convenient way to avoid accountability. Interviews are choices. Then choices have consequences. When Savannah asked if he was threatening her or the show, Jack looked genuinely puzzled. He said he wasn't threatening anyone. The consequences he was talking about were simple reality when you disrespect someone on live television. You lose their trust and their willingness to engage. Savannah accused him of being self-righteous, of acting like he was above scrutiny. Jack corrected her. Tough questions were fair game. Invasive ones were not. Dragging minor children into the spotlight crossed a line, and she knew it. Savannah argued that Jack himself had brought up his kids earlier. He shook his head firmly. There was a vast difference between mentioning family in the context of work-life balance and dissecting specific social media posts made by minors. Pretending otherwise, he said, was deliberately dishonest. As the co-host warned they were out of time, Savannah dismissed it, telling Jack that one day he'd look back and realize he'd overreacted. Jack didn't hesitate. He said he doubted that very much. After decades in the industry, he had learned to trust his instincts, and from the moment the questions shifted toward manufactured conflict, this interview had felt wrong, and that was something he refused to ignore. Savannah doubled down. She said Jack was only upset because she hadn't treated him the way other interviewers did. No softballs. No easy laughs, no letting him ramble unchecked. She claimed she had tried to have a real conversation and that he simply couldn't handle it. Jack laughed again, that same hollow, humorless sound. He told her she could believe whatever helped her sleep at night. But he knew the difference between a challenging interview and a hit job, and this had clearly been the latter. When Savannah asked why she would possibly want to do a hit job on him, Jack didn't speculate. He said her motivations didn't matter. Whether it was for ratings, attention, or ego, the result was the same. She had chosen spectacle over substance, and that was a choice she would have to own. By now, a producer's voice cut sharply through the studio, urging them to go to commercial. Savannah finally acknowledged it, announcing a break. Jack shut that down immediately. There would be no right back. He was leaving, and he wasn't returning after the commercials. Savannah warned him that walking away would make him look terrible, that viewers would assume he couldn't handle the heat, that he had something to hide. Jack said he was comfortable with how he looked. He had been honest, direct, and anyone watching could decide for themselves. He trusted people to recognize manufactured drama when they saw a tan too. Understand that he had simply drawn a line to protect his family. Savannah told him he was naive if he thought the media would frame it that way. The headlines, she said, would scream meltdown and walk off, not nuance. Jack shrugged. The media could write whatever it wanted. He wasn't going to make decisions based on fear. Truth didn't need spin, he said. Anyone who wanted it could watch the footage and judge for themselves. When Savannah accused him of being impossible to work with and turning the interview into a circus, Jack fired back instantly. The circus began the moment she brought his children into it. Everything that followed was a direct consequence of that decision. At that point, the co-host stood, acknowledging the obvious: the interview was over. He thanked Jack for coming on, despite how things had unraveled. Jack returned the courtesy, thanking him for trying to mediate and making it clear his issue wasn't with the crew, but with how Savannah had handled the interview. Savannah said she stood by every question she asked. No regrets. She'd do it exactly the same way again. Jack nodded and said he believed her, and that was precisely the problem. Her refusal to even consider that she might have crossed a line told him everything he needed to know. Savannah countered that Jack simply wanted to control the narrative. Jack said they were going in circles. Neither of them was changing their mind. He had said what he needed to say. So had she. Asterisk, and with that, he turned and walked off the set for the final time. Asterisk, the cameras followed him through the studio doors until he disappeared from view. The audience sat frozen, then scattered applause. Not loud, not unanimous, but unmistakable. Others remained silent, unsure of what they'd just witnessed. Savannah sat back down, took a breath, and looked straight into the camera, announcing a commercial break with practiced composure. But something flickered behind her eyes: frustration, anger, maybe even doubt. Asterisk, the co-host, tried to reset the show, teasing a cooking segment and a musical performance, but the atmosphere had changed. The awkwardness lingered like smoke in the studio. As the show cut to commercial, Savannah turned off camera, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. She looked shaken. The interview had lasted less than 15 minutes, but it created a moment that would be dissected, debated, and replayed far longer than that. Asterisk, what began as a routine promotional appearance turned into a flashpoint raising uncomfortable questions about media boundaries, power dynamics, and respect. So now the question is yours to answer. Asterisk, was Jack Black right to walk off? Asterisk, or was Savannah Guthrie simply doing her job? Asterisk, and if you were in Jack's position, would you have stayed, or would you have walked away? Asterisk, drop your thoughts below, hit subscribe, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the moments that Hollywood never meant for you to see.